Today's dedication is for Zahn, who gave me a very generous 1 year's worth of subscriptions on Patreon. Samut the Driving Force versus Delina, Arna, and Angelo. Completely forgot to hit record this time, unfortunately, so I do appreciate that you all allow me to upload these replay function videos. Thankfully on Magic Online you can, with a bit of luck, replay previous games without any errors occurring. So to start the game off, Delina has played a mountain. We draw into Misty Rainforest, so that is going to fix our white mana. And it's just skimmed through the land that we kept on top, but it's one of those lands that will start our engines at level 1. Good to get that going as soon as we can, because we don't want to be reliant on Samut to get our speed up to level 4. Arna, played by Terax, and we see a turn 1 Soul Ring straight into Arcane Signet, so accelerating way ahead of us. And the mono red player shows us an Impact Tremors, ready to play all the token copies out into that. Now, I don't realise my error until here, but we're looking at playing Magda so that I can start swinging in this turn and making the treasure token straight away, as well as getting the speed up to level 2 immediately after we play the Moraganda Raceway. And I went for Lush Portico because I had it in my head that this was a mountain, because it looks more red than white to me out of the corner of my eye, so didn't take a close enough look at that and have not fixed the colours correctly. So instead I imagine I go for Nature's Law in for some red mana. Yeah, so decided on a commercial district and threw a basic into the bin because we've got enough lands available to us, 3 in hand at the moment. So it's likely that Arna is going to start the turn with 5 mana available, which means it is a turn 2 Arna for the Esper player. Noteworthy that there is a Monamo in play over here. Delina throws down a Nykthos we'll have a look at in a minute, and the Plundering Barbarian will ping us all, but it will also blow up the Soul Ring here. And the land he played was a Nykthos Shrine to Nyx, so already has Devotion to Red of 2. So thanks to my blunder with the non-fixing of the red mana previously, we just so happened to draw into a Tiger, but yeah, we could be swinging in with Magda to the left here and getting up to level 2 already. But it's lucky that I drew into the Tiger because we need double red so that we can go for our 2 2-drops. So Magda will come in a turn too late, and Colladin will come down as well, ready to animate the Salvation Engine from the new set, even though there are no artifacts to reanimate with that, unfortunately. So it's just a case of setting up with our couple of 2-drops. And Hello is the second commander to hit play. The mana's plummeted for Terax after the Soul Ring went down, but Arna still made it in play and made it around the table by turn 3. So we see a Sword of Realms. The equipped creature has +2 to power and vigilance, and when it dies, return it to its owner's hand. The equipped creature, that is, returns to the owner's hand. So plays and equips that for 4 mana, and swings it in to the right, can't be blocked. Makes a copy with Arna's ability, so Halvar dies to the legend rule. He decides to keep the token copy and throw Halvar in the bin. So I'm guessing that he wants to reanimate this at some point and put the double strike on his stuff. Anyway, lands the 6 points of commander on Delina, and the Wild Mage, hitting play for the first time, pings us again with the enchantment, and then decides to hold back because he doesn't have any decent attacks with his Dwarf. And we draw into Teferi's Protection, so just decide in the end, I was deciding between the Salvation Engine and the Witch Enchanter. The Salvation Engine is just going to die straight away to copies of this, and I'd rather it goes on equipments and stuff, so decide instead to blow up the Impact Tremors with the Witch Enchanter instead of just passing the turn and doing nothing. Noteworthy that had we have swung in with Magda a turn sooner, I could have gone for Samut that turn. Unfortunately didn't get the chance, but did get the chance to blow up the Tremors, which I think is going to be relevant throughout the game. So for the Grixis player now, it is a Glimmer Bell. That is a 1/3 flyer that untaps itself for 2 mana. And that is enchanted with dual casting, so it now has red and tap to copy an instant or sorcery you control. So for 3 mana you can copy something and untap this. Stonecoil Serpent tapped out into that, X is 5, so reach, trample, protection from multicoloured. And this time Arna is swinging into the left, trying to get him to block with that flyer by the looks of it. But he does not block this early in the game, so takes 6 points of commander damage. And from Delina it is Harmonic Prodigy, followed by Pia Nalar enters with a Thopter token. That can make it so creatures can't block, it can buff artifact creatures as well. And now Delina swinging in. Not worthy of the lands, they have Access Tunnel to make things unblockable. Same with the Rogue's Passage. Although they didn't use the Access Tunnel here to make Delina unblockable, instead decided that it was a good idea to get down Pia Nalar. So now Delina is facing down against a 1-3 and a Death Touching Commander, the two of which will trade, trying his luck on not being blocked here. So they get double the triggers, thanks to Delina. They make a copy of Pia Nalar, and the Pia Nalar enters with a Thopter token, of course. They actually get 2 copies of Pia Nalar, so it is 2 Thopters that enter. And then decide to copy the Plundering Barbarian, so it was 2 copies of the Dwarf as well, acting like a Reclamation Sage. Blows up the Sword of the Realms and the Stone Coil Serpent, so good to get rid of that before it starts tangling with any multicoloured stuff. So as for where the attacks are going, Delina into the left. We get a Pia Nalar. There's a Pia Nalar into the left as well, and then both the Dwarves down the middle. Blocks are made, so Delina goes down to the Death Toucher, and Angelo goes down to Delina, so yeah, don't imagine he thought that he was going to make that block there, but we'll now have to recast Delina. Has an okay devotion to red with the Nykthos, but not enough to warrant actually tapping that down for the red, unless he wants to convert some mana. Anyway, we go through to our turn. Luckily we have a 6th land, we draw into another one, so we can go for our commander here. And we're still only on speed 1, thanks to going a bit slower early on, so decide to just go wide on the player to the left. We do have a buff, thanks to Samut now, and our speed 1, so this will now trade with the Glimmer Bell. But I'm assuming that he's not going to block there, which is why I go over that way. But unpredictably again, I wasn't expecting him to block with the commander on Delina, and he is going to block with this as well, losing out on the enchantment before he does anything with it. So Magda not going to make us any treasure. Or not anymore after this, I mean. It only needs to be tapped, it doesn't need to deal combat damage. So we do get a treasure on the way out. We also get to level up the speed to level 2 upon hitting with the Colladin. So that does at least mean that we can hold up Teferi's Protection for 1 mana now. So even if we didn't do anywhere near as much as we wanted to do with Magda, it is relevant on the way out that it leaves us with 1 treasure for the protection. Phyrexian Ironfoot for Angelo. Doesn't untap during the untap step, but for 2 mana you can untap it. Doesn't have any snow mana. And then decides to pass at that with 2 blue mana held up, which is always ominous. Terrax plays a tap land, 3 cards in hand, and still decides to swing in, so this might be a board wipe. He goes into the right again, putting him on 10 points of commander damage. Or he would if there weren't Thopters in the way. Forgot about those. So a Flying Thopter does jump in the way. Terrax will still gain some life here, and has managed to sneak his way up to 56. And just holds up the 5 mana and passes. Now we see a Felden of the 3rd path. For the red player, there's no creatures in his graveyard. But he's got more devotion to red now, there's 2 pips on this. So he can actually make 5 mana with the Nykthos and manages to cast a Zealous Conscript. Doesn't have a sack outlet at the moment, and we can wait to see what he targets anyway before we go for Teferi's Protection. But we don't need to worry about it regardless. The Grixis player goes for Phantom Interference, forces our opponent to pay 2 to have this spell resolve, which he obviously can't do, so that means that the Conscripts is going to go into the bin, and it now means that next turn Felden has a target, so we might be seeing Zealous Conscripts next turn. We just continue to draw lands, unfortunately. It's most of what we've drawn into here, so at least we've got a land to make for the turn. And then with Salvation Engine, it only costs us, we get a 2 mana discount, so 3 mana for this, and it is given haste and animated straight away with the Colladin, so we don't even have to crew it. And that is a massive 8/10, which is pretty good for 3 mana. I think I actually forgot to swing in with Samut last turn because I forgot it has haste. Not sure if I pointed that out or not. But the 4/2 goes into tangle with the 4 toughness creature over here. Samut goes over there as well because I want to go wide and make sure that we get the speed up on our opponent. and the 8-10 into the right probably just gets chump blocked, but I'm assuming that Arna is holding up some kind of interaction over here, so I want to try not to bother him while we're still building our board and building up our speed. Nothing to reanimate with the Salvation engine, so not quite as potent as it would have been. And blocks are made, a Thopter on the vehicle, and yeah, I wasn't sure if our opponent was going to bother blocking here because this looks like a combo piece, but decides to destroy our Witch Enchanter and allow the commander through. So when our commander hits, we do go up to speed 3, which is funny because we hit with the first strike first, go up to speed 3, and then buff all our other creatures before they deal damage. It wasn't relevant during this combat, but it is worth noting in other combats, if you can get this through first before you're at max speed, it will go up a level and then buff all your other stuff ready for them to deal even more damage. Might make combat a little bit more difficult for your opponents to calculate. Anyway, just a case of us holding up Teferi's Protection for 1 mana now because, well, we're not really drawing into that much of anything. The Grixis commander comes into play again. Arna is straight into combat again, this time attacks us with the flyer and just passes with a bunch of mana held up. More mana being generated by the Nykthos over here. And playing a Panharmonicon into the Harmonic Prodigy will give it a buff with its prowess. Not seeing Delina yet, surprisingly. And as we said before, Feldon can now see the Zealous Conscripts in the bin thanks to the counter, so now has something to reanimate. We can wait to see what he targets with the Zealous Conscripts. He gets 2 triggers on that thanks to the Panharmonicon. And we can wait to see what he targets before we go for the Protection. So the first one went on to the Samut, the other one went on to the Esper Commander. They do have to pay the ward cost on that, which is discard a card with only 1 card in hand, so before we do anything, we allow them to pay the ward. And they do pay for that, discarding the last card in their hand, which is a Solemn Simulacrum. Now, I'm debating here whether or not to go for Teferi's Protection or not to keep our Samut from being stolen, but they don't have a sack outlet or any cards in hand. It all depends on where they swing in. We can always go to Teferi's Protection for 3 mana if they decide to turn everything in sideways at us, but we can also use this as a means of keeping them from attacking us, so we can kind of force them to go elsewhere. But I really want to hold on to this to try and protect all of our creatures and vehicles from the inevitable board wipe. So decide to let them have it. Worst case scenario, we can just go for the Protection when they turn everything in at us, like I said. Now it's interesting, I didn't realise it worked like this, but Samut does not leave and enter play under our opponent's control, it just slides across the table. And it does seem as though they get the speed level up just for having a Start Your Engines permanent on their side of the field. So even though it didn't enter, they get to start their engines here, so level 1, and then when they swing in and hit, it will jump up to level 2 straight away. And this is relevant because they do have the buffs on all their creatures, which I didn't think they would have. That was part of the reason I made the decision to allow them to have our commander. But good to know that that's how it works. Assuming Magic Online isn't doing it wrong, that is. So if my memory serves me, they actually, strangely, only end up swinging in with 3 creatures. So we get the 5/4, we will still receive commander damage, as will Terrax, who is going to get hit by our Samut. And then the 4/3 Zealous Conscripts is going over there as well. This will get sacrificed at the end of the turn, so he might as well swing with it. But yeah, only attacks in with those 3 creatures, amazingly. He's leaving 11 damage on the board there. So as we said, goes up to level 2 once he hits us, and further buffs his creatures. And then at the end of the turn we'll get our creatures back, so Samut has haste anyway, but we have it at the beginning of the turn, so doesn't have summoning sickness regardless. A Smuggler's Buggy is what we draw into, so finally starting to see some non-land stuff, and that's got a bit of card advantage on it as well. Luckily we've got haste for it as well. One of the downsides of vehicles is, like creatures, they do not have haste inherently. With speed 3 we get a 3 mana discount. Play the Smuggler's Buggy now if we can swing in with it this turn for 1 mana. And there we see Delina scoops, so just deals a bunch of damage and leaves. I'm really not sure why they didn't try to replay their Delina, especially when they had a means of unblockable on it. But they lost out on a bunch of damage when we got rid of the impact tremors. So the Smuggler's Buggy enters, and it will gain haste and become a creature straight away thanks to the legend. And we'll have a look at the top 4 cards and hide something away. So we've got our choice of armed and armoured. There is a 4 mana red version of this that turns all the artifacts into artifact creatures. This is the only one we've got in the list. A rolling hamsphere and a smuggler's copter. I opt for hiding away the smuggler's copter because we might be able to draw some more cards with that. Even though we've got few in hand at the moment, looting not quite as good if you don't have a lot of cards in hand. But it's just one more creature to swing in with as well. So the smuggler's buggy has to hit in order for us to get that copter. It is currently a 7/10 thanks to the buffs. So I just decide to turn everything into the right now. So that is a 10/7, a 4/5 commander and a 5/3. And it is noteworthy that they can untap Arna, of course, with the Manamo that they played on turn 2. But we're making it difficult for them to know what to block with at least, so looks as though they are going for untapping Arna in order to block with it and gain some more life while they're at it. So we do not lose out on our dwarf, they are blocking the vehicle. That means that we don't get the hideaway card at least. So only going down to 47, but we finally, by turn 7, max up the speed to level 4 and now we get the maximum discount on non-creature spells and the maximum buff on our creatures. And that does mean that this thing taps down for 2 mana now as well. A Bloodletter Quill is 2 mana and tap to put a counter on it and lose a life for each counter and draw. Demir removes a counter. Arna just deciding to pass straight through the turn with all that mana held up. And we draw into a non-land at least, that is a Drum Bellower. So we've got a means of untapping all of our creatures during our turn if we want to. We could make some blocks with vehicles here and there if we decided we needed that. So tapping down 2 lands, managed to play Drum Bellower. And thanks to the maximum buff on Samut, it does have summoning sickness, but it can still crew vehicles. So we can crew this hefty 6 crew salvation engine. So Drum Bellower does crew. It crews the smuggler's buggy actually. Use the Colladin to crew the salvation engine, and now we've got an 11/7 buggy, a 10/10 engine and a 4/5 Samut. Samut doesn't buff itself, and just decide to turn everything in sideways at this point, hoping that we can go some ways to getting rid of Terax. But he has other things in mind unfortunately, so decides to tap down a heap of mana, and with all 8 mana, the dwarf not blowing this up for Delina was relevant in the end. A Dismantling Wave, when it's cycled for 8 mana, destroys all artifacts and enchantments. So we're not going to deal any damage here, but we're just going to have to be forced to go for Teferi's Protection and get a free turn. Only costing us 1 mana, but once again, not getting into the Smuggler's Copter. This player did tap down 2 blue mana, which made me think, of course, he was going to counter us there, but instead decided to draw with the Bloodletter Quill before it is destroyed. Farmstead Gleaner, again a creature that doesn't untap, but more importantly it does have an untap ability, which I dare say is what it's for, similar to the other artifact creature that came in before. So I'm not sure what the aim is with that, but obviously part of some kind of combo again, you would assume. Call of the Ring came down as well. They do have creatures in play to become the Ring Bearer and draw extra cards with. A Thieving Skydiver for the Esper player, and he put 2 into X on this, which I didn't understand. He goes on to say in the chat that he was actually aiming for Call of the Ring because of the weird frame that Lord of the Rings cards are in. This actually does look metallic, in all fairness. It's got like a grey frame as opposed to a black one, so he just assumed, like I did with the planes before, thinking out of the corner of my eye this was a mountain because it's red. This does look like an artifact at first glance. So as much as I love the Lord of the Rings set, I don't really like the frames that they put things in. They look different than all the other Magic cards. So anyway, gets a flying blocker into play regardless. And we managed to draw into a Dispatch. No means of refilling our hand this game, unfortunately. So looks as though I am crewing something with the Drum Bellower. I imagine I just go for the exact same play again. Yeah, we've got an 11/7, a 10/10, and the 4/5 Samut all going into the right. I did debate whether or not we should dispatch the Thieving Skydiver, but yeah, maybe we should have done simply to try and get the Smuggler's Copter out, but it's not like we've got many cards to discard into it anyway. So making them block with it, they do block the buggy, and take 14 damage, including 4 commander. So at 31 life and 12 points of commander damage. And then with the Drum Bellower we do untap all of our creatures ready for blocks if we need to. Call of the Ring tempts our opponent, so they go up to level 1 and make the Farmstead Gleaner the Ring Bearer, meaning that it's a legend that can't be blocked by creatures with greater power. A Font of Agonies, he's got some random cards over here. I remember thinking, I'm not really sure what he's trying to do to be honest, but a means of removal potentially. So the Ring Bearer swings in towards us, we can't block it because we've got a lot of power on board. And then they decide to lose out on their red mana to untap it and put a plus counter on this thing, dealing 3 to us. And there we are, it is 2 board wipes in a row, near enough a Toxic Deluge. It was always bound to happen. Being played by Arna. And X is 5, so everything gets wiped out here, there's nothing we can do. No point in crewing our artifacts when they're tapped. So Samut back into the command zone, everything else in the bin. And we've only just got Metalcraft for our dispatch, so yeah, it's a good thing that Magda made that treasure token for us in the end. And after that has the mana to cast a Heavenly Blade Master. So that is flying double strike. When it enters, attach any number of auras and equipment to it. So our opponent's been pretty unlucky there. Seeing a distinct lack of those. He's all control, no equipment at the moment. Tapping Dimir mana, and I thought it might be a counter spell. It is instead a Drag the Canal. So makes a 2/2 detective token. If a creature died this turn, gain 2, surveil 2 and investigate. So in the bin here is a Morphling and a Disciple of Deceit. So see what we draw into here. We've got the dispatch available, like I said, if we want to get something out of the way. And we just so happen to draw into 4th Aeolingus, so yeah, our opponent wiping the board just in time, as is so often the case. So ultimately what we have to do here in order to get a discount on our X spells is play Samut for 8 mana. And that does at least mean that we can still hold up our exile spells, so I do decide to dispatch the Angel out of the way and crew the Smuggler's Buggy, hopefully, finally, landing the damage with that. So I think with the 11-7 I do decide to go into the right, and yep, knocking our opponent down by 11 from 26. And after that we do manage to get a Smuggler's Copter into play. I pass priority, the game's lagging like it does on Magic Online, so I do pass priority too many times and go through to the end step. We could have got down the Smuggler's Buggy in for free again, ready to swing in next turn because we don't have haste anymore. So yeah, really losing out on that unfortunately. It's a lot of damage to lose out on as well. Anyway, our opponent, after the board wipe, still has a creature, so still has Call of the Ring online, ready to take 2 and draw a card. And these 2 low mana black permanents are working in tandem together because Font of Agonies, if you pay life into something, you do get the blood counters, so 2 more and you'll be able to destroy any creature, including our artifact creatures. Anyway, the 2/2 Ring Bearer swings in at us and discards to the loot a Malefic Scythe. After that he bolts down a Volcanic Fissure, so now has the blood counters on this to destroy our commander, which is relevant, especially when we've got pretty much free stuff that we can cast. So that Font of Agony is more relevant than I initially thought it was going to be. And it's a Blood-Soaked Insight, doesn't have a means of copying that at least, but manages to steal from us a Sol Ring. There's a Forest on top, and the Pridewin Steel Flagship. Nothing to do with the 1 card in hand apparently, just plays Arna again. Maybe it's counter magic or spot removal he has. But we managed to untap with our commander. We draw into another free vehicle in the Weatherlight. So which one do we want first? I think I go for, yeah, the Hideaway card first that our opponents know about. Trying to gain as much information on the board as possible. If he decides to destroy our commander with the Font of Agonies, then we can actually afford to recast it here. So I'm trying not to spend any mana, which we will have to do. We'll have to put at least Boros into 4th of Aeolingus. But the last card in hand is apparently interaction from the Esper player, so Arcane Denial will draw us 2 cards at the beginning of the next upkeep, and we don't get the Smuggler's Buggy into play of course. So try my luck with some more card advantage in the form of Weatherlight. Can't crew this because it doesn't have haste at the moment, so it will have Summoning Sickness when it becomes a creature. And amazingly, our commander is still in place, so we get a 4 mana discount on X and get to cast the 4th Aelingus. So X turns out to be 11 on that, and we'll get the monarch and a bunch of tokens. Then with my commander, before it dies and the human knight, I decide to equip up or crew up the salvation engine because we've now got a vehicle finally that we can reanimate. Also decide to animate the smuggler's copter because it has evasion. We'll still have 9 big human knights available. But I'm under no illusion that we're going to keep the big buffs on our creatures, so a 10-10 and a 9-5 in the air. The humans are currently 6-2s with haste and trample. So I decide to just turn everything into the right. We need to go wide and account for the lifelink as well. But we also need to account for the fact that this is likely going to blow up our commander and debuff everything. So if we turn everything in sideways and get the debuff to the right, we still get rid of Terrax here. But with no cards in hand, maybe we should have left him alone and gone in to the left here instead. Smuggler's Copter we can say no to, so all we do here is draw a card and discard it straight away. I'm thinking we're bound to just have a land on top. Maybe we can discard a vehicle into the bin, ready to reanimate with this. And it turns out that I shouldn't have said yes here because we end up drawing into March of the Multitudes, which is of no use to us in the bin whatsoever. The buggy is reanimated though, and it was just a couple of lands and one of the new enters and exiles something permanents. You might have just got a frame of it there. I skipped through too quickly. We put Trouble in Pairs underneath the smuggler's buggy in an attempt to draw some cards, but we're having a surprisingly difficult time getting through with this. So there we go, as we expected, Font of Agonies blows up our commander, and I think it must be, yeah, it's just a token, so he decides to take a token out on the way down, but we've got 16 damage here alone, and then these 2 creatures hitting will account for the life gain. So definitely seeing the back of Terrax here, and we do become the monarch, so draw ourselves into a Swords to Plowshares. Call of the Ring, again, is tempted, so they'll go up to level 3, where if it becomes blocked by a creature, the creature's controller sacks it at the end of combat. We are down to a 1v1, but unfortunately, the Grixis player is drawing cards, manages to steal away a forest from us. Played that from exile over here, still has the vehicle available. So the Ring Bearer swinging in again as a 2-2 will get to loot, and decides to loot away Wake the Dragon. Steals the Monarch from us when he hits, so probably could have held back a human token to account for that. And just passes the turn, so now has 6 cards in hand. I think it was definitely a mistake to not take that player out while we had the chance. Just been the underdog all game and not really expecting him to do much of anything, to be honest. He hasn't really done anything all game. We draw Unidentified Hovership, getting into the vehicles finally. So crew up the Smuggler's Buggy to try and get ourselves into the Trouble in Pairs. Crew up the Smuggler's Copter as well, now that we're starting to get into cards. I thought we'd still draw the cards from Terrax's Arcane Denial, even though he got taken out, but apparently we don't draw the 2 cards on the next upkeep when the player goes down, so losing out on 2 cards there by taking him out, unfortunately. Decide to use a couple of human knights to crew the Weatherlight for some card advantage as well, but then don't they always have it? The Cyclonic Rift from the Grixis player bounces everything back, including all of our creatures, so now we just have a grip full of vehicles, unfortunately, and what's more is the treasure went down, which we actually needed that extra 1 mana in order to afford our commander here. We cannot play Samut, which means at the moment we can't play any creatures. So do you remember when I looted this into the bin? That loot was random, it could have panned out, it could have hurt us, and in this case it hurt us, because now we don't have March of the Multitudes available to hold up on our opponent's turn and actually get some pilots into play. So instead I decide to play the Unidentified Hovership. In response, the clue token is cracked, and we at least get to get rid of the Ring Bearer here. Then play the Weatherlight over the Buggy and Smuggler's Copter as well, just a case of praying that we have something to crew those with next turn. Getting up to the maximum level on the ring, but like I said, doesn't have a Ring Bearer at least. Doesn't have enough counters on this in order to destroy our commander either. So instead plays a Double Vision. We haven't seen all that many instants from our opponent like I've pointed out before, but obviously has something planned for double vision, or he just doesn't have anything else to do. 5 cards in hand, goes up to 6 because he still has the monarchy over here, and of course now we start drawing into the vehicles. So best to keep hold of the Surge Hacker mech until we can actually blow up one of our opponent's creatures. Instead decide to get down at the Smuggler's Buggy again, and again skip through the frame too quickly, but we had the new Valor big white vehicle from the new set with Vigilance Flying and Lifelink. You can cycle it to make pilot tokens, I think, and then it was 2 lands and an Austere command. Decide to take the Austere command, hide away under it to try and take out some enchantments, potentially, maybe some creatures. Salvation Engine coming into play again, getting Summoning Sickness away from that for next turn. And I think our opponent did tap down some blue mana in response to that, but decided to untap it for whatever reason. And did have something to do at the end of our turn with all that mana and empty the pits, and it is X7, X is doubled, thanks to the double vision. So fittingly did do something with his instant doubling in the end, which is what you would think you would have seen more of from this player. Dredged a bunch of stuff, or delved a bunch of stuff out of his graveyard in order to do that. And because it's at the end of the turn, he gets to untap, and these do not have Summoning Sickness, so 14 2/2s equals 28 damage to us. And it's ironic really that we want to be playing some X spells to get a bunch of tokens into play in this deck, and that is exactly what takes us out with the Grixis player. So definitely decided on taking out the wrong player. I was certainly underestimating this guy because, like I said, he wasn't really doing anything all game. But that Cyclonic Rift is what ended us really. Just couldn't get into the creatures to actually crew our stuff anymore. So turns in sideways, knocks us down to -10, and that is the end of that game. But at least got to show you how we run the deck with Samut the driving force. I'm sure there's plenty of tweaks that could be made to the deck, but you can look yourself at the deck list in the description below. I haven't really done much with vehicles, so I'm not all that well versed in how to run them entirely optimally. Like I said, plenty of tweaks to be made, I'm sure, but we'll see how popular this deck is and see if I bother to decide to do that or not. If you did enjoy it, then please consider donating on Patreon like a couple of you do already, and a massive thank you to those few people who are keeping the channel alive. I'm tribalkai. Thank you for watching.